The original Xbox was an oddity. Almost a Dreamcast sequel, the console would struggle to find a niche. It had platformers, weird controller games, and Halo, which would ultimately become the Xbox thing. Mature games with blood and guts. This paradigm would follow onto the Xbox 360 and arguably just reinforce itself. And while Halo would still appear on the next generation of consoles, Microsoft was looking for another series to help carry that torch. Well before the Epic Games Store and Fortnite, Epic was a developer making the Unreal Engine, still a popular engine today with a new iteration coming out soon, and the Unreal series, a once popular series of boomer shooters. Unreal Warfare was to be another entry in this series, a class-based shooter with mechs that existed in the multiplayer realm like its predecessors, but with the growing popularity of cinematic story-heavy games like Resident Evil 4, a direct influence on this game as stated by director Cliff Blezinski, and if you play it, it's not a very subtle influence, led to the game morphing into Gears of War, which came to be one of the Xbox 360's flagship mature titles in 2006, and with the PC version a year later, which would add several chapters back into the game that had seemingly been cut from the original release, or someone just decided that the last act was way too short. The game would also be the only one in the series to get remastered once as Gears of War Ultimate Edition, released on Xbox One 2015 and PC a year later, which includes the bonus chapters and gameplay improvements from later games, and also re-releasing again later this year in August 2025 as Gears of War Reloaded for the Xbox Series consoles, PC, and the PS5 for some reason, which is free for people who owned Ultimate Edition, and serves mostly as a graphical upgrade on said prior version. Gears of War is a surprisingly polished first entry in the series. The Unreal games were pretty boomer shooter, fast-paced and arcadey, basically the opposite of Gears. Gears is much more lumbering and weighty, focused on fast shooting, but also careful positioning, movement, and pacing to stay safe behind cover. The cover mechanic really was the make or break for this game, and it comes together really well. There are some rough edges to it all. The game sometimes struggles with switching cover, there's a small delay when trying to snap to cover, and the roadie run, a dash that's used to get around the battlefield more quickly but which locks you into a mostly straight line, occasionally gets hung up on little environmental details. But in a large sense, the bones of Gears of War were pretty much established from the get-go. Getting to cover is relatively snappy, blind firing is a semi-viable if kind of bad tactic, and the AI tries its best to push cover to keep the battles intense despite how entrenched it's possible to get. The guns also got that snappy, loud, and flashy feel to them down from the get-go as well, and the active reload is genius, turning every reload into a mini-game centered on learning the timing for guns to get faster reloads and a temporary buff, which keeps even routine battles interesting as your focus is drawn from them to simply reload without getting stunned, a process that gets less and less consuming as you settle into your favorite weapons. It's honestly such a brilliant addition to a game like this. That said, I will admit there are a ton of issues on that front. The basic weapon, the Lancer, an assault rifle with a chainsaw on the bottom of it, is a very solid main weapon, but the long hit stun out of moves and even longer wind-up time for the chainsaw makes the series' most iconic weapon's most iconic ability nigh unusable. It requires so much lead-up and prep time that it is never, ever worth it to even try, especially when there are so many explosive enemies that punish using the chainsaw anyway. Weapon variety is also quite slim for a purely action-based third-person shooter. There's the Lancer and its burst-fire locus equivalent, a shotgun that is severely underpowered until basically melee range, a pistol and a revolver, which are serviceable backup weapons at best, a decent sniper rifle, a very fun if limited grenade launcher, grenades, and the torque bow, which is the only really creative weapon in the arsenal. As its firing arc changes, the longer its charge, and its bolts are explosive. It's damn fun, if a rare sight here. I guess the Hammer of Dawn also counts, but I'm not sure if the satellite laser gimmick weapon that gets used 3 times really counts towards this total, no matter how endlessly cool it is. Locust variety is also a touch disappointing. I don't need a ton, but for a majority of the game, it's standard guys with guns, boomers, which are the heavies who wield and are the only source of grenade launchers, and wretches, little melee horde grunts, who are really only relevant because of their explosive counterparts, which are cruel bait for the Lancer and often blend in dark environments or crowds of standard wretches, to an extent that they would be replaced with a different suicide bomber type enemy in later games because they lacked visual distinction. There are also a number of boss type enemies that appear the Corpsers, these giant spider crabs, and the Cedars, which are usually very brief and gimmicky anyways. Pretty much everything else in the game is a one-off. It's not that the enemy selection is altogether awful, but it is narrow and limited, and alongside the narrow weapon selection, even in this fairly short game, roughly 5 hours, things do feel a tiny bit repetitive. The game doesn't have enough mix-ups to its base formula to carry it entirely with the rough edges. The co-op and AI allies also leave a bit to be desired. Getting downed is a fine mechanic, and needing to be rescued is a fine mechanic. But enemies don't target you, so there's really not a lot of risk, and you also can't crawl, so you're kind of just stuck there. You're really only going to end up dying incidentally through heavy weaponry or an enemy walking right into you. But the big issue is that NPC allies just won't pick you up ever. I'd guess they were worried it'd make the game too easy, even if a lot of attacks just skip downing for death outright anyways. And in co-op, it's not the biggest deal, usually, but boy does it suck when you hit one of the obligatory split-up sections, and any slip-up, regardless of how savable your ally is, results in instant failure. The split-up thing is a great idea too, so this little flaw holding it back is a shame. Choosing a path adds a bit of replayability through unique segments and puts you in uncomfortable situations without your allies, but it feels deliberately annoying that you're kneecapped in co-op and tethered to your allies' failures. Maybe this whole section feels a bit too negative. The hard part is that pretty much every complaint I have is immediately fixed in the next game. It's hard not to be like, oh, this, and this don't feel as incredibly smooth as its sequels, and to forget that this game is itself quite fun for most of its runtime. It's a simple game, the world wasn't fully fleshed out, the enemy variety is slim, as are the weapons, but it feels damn good to hunker down and shoot despite that, and really only looks worse than its sequels looking backwards at its original release. One thing that did catch me off guard is the lack of Horde mode, which was so iconic it not only overtook the campaign, but also the multiplayer of the series. I entirely forgot it was an invention of 2, and the side modes feel very barren for its exclusion. On the topic of multiplayer, it's pretty obviously and self-admittedly an afterthought for this first entry, which itself kind of feels like proof of concept for its sequel. With pretty small maps, a small rotation of 16 maps, with 2 of those being from Map Pack 1 out of 1, and 4 of those being from Hidden Fronts, 2 DLC packs that were made free at some point, although costed money at some other points, and 4 modes: Warzone, which is a 4 vs 4 deathmatch; Assassination, where one player on each team is the leader who needs to be killed to end the game, but who's also forced into fighting by not allowing their allies to pick up weapons until they've been picked up by the leader; Execution, which is Warzone, but down enemies don't bleed out and need to be stomped on to finish them off; and Annex, which was added later in the game's lifespan to coincide with the release of Hidden Fronts, for which the maps were made, and is King the Hill but based around holding and keeping a specified weapon. Honestly, it's a pretty great idea for a multiplayer shooter like this. However, finding games is a little tough. I'm sure there's groups and weekends where the game sees play, but it's really hard to imagine too many people hop into lobbies for the original release of Gears of War over its more popular sequels or remake or upcoming remake, and the lack of bots in local is a bit disappointing as far as playing around with this section of the game goes. Gears of War really is the embodiment of 2006 in gaming. Gray, gray, brown, gray, gray. Holy hell, this game is so gray. Day, night, underground, it doesn't fucking matter. It's all gray. Marcus Phoenix, Dom Baird, and Coltrane are the most cartoonishly large men ever born. They're human refrigerators in body armor who only differ in face and skin tone. Why in the hell did they make Marcus look like Fred Durst? I can't take him seriously at all. It's so fucking funny. They're not even the standard humans in this world. These civilians are normal looking people. The women are normal size. They look so fucking ridiculous next to our leads. Holy shit. It's a hurdle to get over, genuinely. Gears of War is so Xbox 360 that it's painful, but there are things I like. For as Fred Durst as Marcus looks, I love John DiMaggio as his voice, who you probably know best as Bender from Futurama, Jake from Adventure Time, Schnitzel from Chowder, and just about every other cartoon ever. His rough voice really sells how devastating the war's been on the world, and hell, while most of the characters aren't really characters yet with no real background or traits, I gotta say, I love Coltrane, the charming, goofy ex-football star turned hero of the people who nearly every random NPC in the game looks up to, and Anthony Carmine getting killed in the opening is a good setup for a joke that pays off later, like games later, not later this game. The cast does come together eventually. Hell, the second game is a good start, but for now let's just take solace in the fact that the voice acting is good and Coltrane exists. On the other hand, the near characterless locusts are pretty good looking. Their odd, pale fleshiness makes them immediately striking. The basic locusts are fairly standard humanoids, as is the main villain, General Ram, but the side locusts are all fantastic. I love the corpsers, whose spider and crab-like design coming up from the ground resembles a giant hand. The Reavers are just giant flying masses covered in weapons. Wretches are just adorable little guys who clamber all over the walls and ceilings, and Brumacs are giant trolls covered in heavy artillery. There's a subtle body horror to the locusts augmenting themselves with weaponry, and the designs are both striking and telling of what each enemy does, which, you know, it's good game design, it's incredibly strong. Environments are a little less impressive. There's some standouts here and there, especially when it comes to the underground mines of emulsion from which the locusts came, which has a distinctive eye-burning yellow. It's stand out in a way, at least. I didn't say in a good way. There's a lot of gray and brown buildings in the first game especially. Even Marcus's family mansion is gray and burnt out. It's a lifeless world by design, but really doesn't help with the game's style. The music, on the other hand, is shockingly good. I kinda anticipated some generic movie score, but there's a shocking amount of energy here. The orchestrated pieces love their huge drums and loud brass sections, while still maintaining a distinct aura chapter to chapter, from eerie quiet pieces broken up by frantic noise to blaring battle anthems. It's not the kind of music you're gonna jam at a party, but honestly, Kevin Repeal killed it. Must have been all those Nancy Drew games he did, or, well, probably like Twisted Metal Black, actually. Gears of War is divided into 5 acts, which became the baseline for the franchise. I don't know why they chose 5. Each consisting of some amount of chapters ranging from 8 to however many the last act has on Xbox 360, like 3, but the other 4 are 6 to 8. And each one is roughly a storyline, although frankly the story probably isn't even secondary as far as this game is concerned, and the acts do kind of blend together outside of the gimmick one, and the limited weapons and enemy selection end up not helping that either. A majority of the story in this first game is bulked in Act 1 because, you know, it's set up for everything else that happens. Marcus begins the game in prison, 4 years into his sentence for abandoning his orders to try to save his father, and 14 years after Emergence Day when the Locusts came from underground to take the surface from humanity. The disgraced soldier is a necessary cog in the machine of the cog, or the coalition of ordered governments, as reinforcements and morale wane, and is broken out by his best friend and co-op companion Dominic Santiago. The rest of the squad is all shoved in too. Carmine dies, Baird is kinda like the techie, smart kinda guy, but he doesn't really do anything this game. Coltrane is the fun one, but he's kind of like, he replaces Carmine, but he doesn't appear that much in this game. And Min Young Kim gets killed by General Ram so that you know he's evil. I don't know, you see Kim for like 30 seconds before he dies. He's the main antagonist whose master plan is to win the war against the humans. He's evil, I guess. He doesn't have a ton going on, frankly. The entire first act is boots on the ground stuff. Building clearing, the Hammer of Dawn tutorial, which I guess is kind of a gimmick. Mainly used to power trip on some small group of locusts or knock out cedars, which are essentially giant living mortars poking up from the ground. It's a cool design. The act wraps up with the Berserker, which is absolutely the best mini-boss in the game. The design is simple. It's invincible and fast, but only when running in a straight line, and an instant down if it smashes into you. And of course, progress depends on baiting into smashing down doors or support beams by rolling out of the way at the last second, which eventually free it up for the only time the Hammer of Dawn is ever used in a tense fight, probably in this entire series, as the Berserker needs constant distraction to warm up the hammer. It's a good finale for this first setup chapter the game. Act 2 Nightfall's the gimmick chapter. Typically you want to stick these a little later once the main formula starts to get old, but you know, I think this mostly works. The primary threat is the Krill, bat-like locusts that patrol the skies in the area and eat anything that wanders into the dark. There's a constant pressure to only play in the light, setting fires with propane tanks, pushing light sources around, pressing your luck to run through small dark patches before you're swallowed whole. I think it's kind of a perfect gimmick, actually. Thoughtful and well-paced without being overbearing, even if a few segments are a little bit jank, and it ends with this really awkward driving and turret hybrid section. Although firing the beam of light to knock out hordes of Krill interrupts power to the truck and stalls it, which does help an otherwise kind of stupid segment stand out as having kind of like an interesting twist on it. There's also some nice bits of world building, primarily with the small settlements of survivors who live in constant fear of the Locusts, but also aren't friends of the Cog, who left them for dead during the early days of the Locust War and the Hammer of Dawn strikes that would even the odds for humanity. The environments aren't much more interesting, but there is some atmosphere, especially in the holdout and the settlement at the end, which does move the needle a little. Things are dark and tense, and the darkness can be very oppressive. The whole act is pretty gimmicky, but works well. Act 3 Belly of the Beast is all underground, which is a mixed bag. There's definitely more color here. One singular eye-burning yellow color. Maybe the gray isn't so bad. Belly of the Beast has lots of tiny gimmicks, most of them not great, but none of them so all-encompassing that it ruins things either. The collapsing floor segment that drops you into pits of wretches are short and simple. I could probably do with less exploding wretches. I think they're just such an awful design for this game, and the later games would completely address the issues with them. They're an even bigger pain in the minecart segment, like Resident Evil 4, which wouldn't be as awful if one explosion didn't mean death, as there are no downs. And also there's this fucking minute-long Willy Wonka segment. It's such a fucking pace breaker when you're getting insta-killed over and over a dozen times. The Corpser fight is fine. It's a huge boss that somehow struggles to kill or even hit you and is essentially just shooting the stomach, then the mouth. But the design is so cool that it isn't immensely disappointing. I wish it did the thumbs up thing from Terminator 2. That would have been funny. And also once you beat it, you get the torque bow, which is a pretty great reward. It's easily the best weapon in the game. The Long Road Home, Act 4, is a pretty comfortable settling into the format. After leaving the mines, Delta Squad needs to travel to Marcus's Manor, where his scientist parents, who died, had collected data on the Locust tunnel systems. There's no new enemies, no new weapons, no new gimmicks. The nicer areas of the world don't change a whole lot either. They're still pretty brown and gray. The Phoenix Mansion is the standout, but even then, its best aspect is just a singular central staircase in the middle of the foyer that serves to be a kind of interesting place for a singular battle. The plot at this point is kind of just ethereal. There's a MacGuffin we need, and once we get it, we can put it in another machine that'll kill all the locusts, so we go to a convenient lore location and we fight. The game is strong enough to get away with this, but it's very, very unexciting as a story to just be told you gotta go somewhere else to power up the kill the bad guys thing. Act 5 Desperation is kinda weird, mostly because of the PC and remaster discrepancy, which has an entire side quest to fight a Brumac, something that wouldn't properly be seen until the sequel otherwise. Act 5, as seen in the original release, is very, very short. 3 chapters and not very long ones either. Setting the big finale on a train is great. Trains are just collections of very little rooms, some cramped and claustrophobic, some with turrets on top of them to shoot down aerial enemies, some you can detach to leave a berserker behind in what is probably the best fight in the game, all while the world zips by. It's a very exciting ending to a game that had largely been fairly routine and plain and happy to just set itself in boring gray buildings. It's really just too bad about the final boss, General Ram. He kinda just stands in place. Can someone in the comments tell me if this is a glitch? Is he supposed to be doing something? Explosions or sufficient damage scatter the krill that are guarding his body, which leaves him vulnerable, and then after you shoot him for a while, the krill come back and he just goes back to standing. If you come out of cover for a really long time, sometimes he'll throw some krill at you, but for the most part he kind of just stands there and dies. I really can't tell if this is intended or if the game broke, but even if he did something, I doubt that it would be much more interesting, as he really is just a giant damage spawn that you occasionally have to grenade. The ending is kind of interesting in the way that a lot of the first pieces of a trilogy are. Unsure of potential or success, the game ends fairly definitively, just in case, with Marcus and Dom using the machine thing to blow up the entire Locust Hive. There's a line about a potential return of the Locust, but it's sort of like A New Hope, where if it ended here, it wouldn't be too weird and you kind of get a full picture of the game. Also, side note, but the krill go extinct, they never appear again. I guess they didn't want to return to that mechanic at all, or maybe they didn't want to limit themselves to only being able to make daytime sections instead of night sections, or if they made night sections, they'd have to be weird krill sections. I don't know. So rest in peace to that gimmick, I guess. We'll see if they manage to come up with another gimmick that's, on that level. Gears of War is a bit tech demo-y. The rough edges are apparent throughout. Baird, please, just pick me up. Just walk over and pick me up. The multiplayer was literally a last-minute addition and had to get a 4th mode and an update. The final act is 20 minutes long, most of that an alpha boss fight, and the variety is very limited. But it's a tech demo with a lot of potential. So much of what the series would go on to be is here, in the first game, and mostly working, the chainsaw notwithstanding. Active reload keeps your mind on every second of the game, where reloading in other shooters is usually a brief break from the game. The cover system is basically all in place, minus a few quality of life things. The Locust's basic forces and motivation are thrown out, as are the series' iconic weapons and the characters, even though they're not fully fleshed out yet. I mean, for a game that feels like a proof of concept for its own sequel, it sure got a lot of things right. It's easy to make fun of the 2060ness of Fred Durst and the rest of Limp Bizkit running around through Grey World to shoot military man bullets at monsters, but no, I mean, I don't really have a real defense for that aspect beyond that it's kind of funny in a loving way, and the game does occasionally squeeze in some interesting segments despite that. Plus, the music is surprisingly great too. Gears of War is a little clunky, but it's a good first swing and a decent game in its own right that only really looks awkward in the shadow of its successors, but we'll get back to those real soon.